Hi again! Now that all the objects of the character are properly skinned, I'm going to go through a couple of body mechanics parameters before we move on to finishing the facial setup. So first I'll go to body settings and to IK. Here you will find a couple of parameters that will let you override the behavior of the IK of the arms and the legs. Just for you to know, the controllers which have the IK constraints are Shin IK and Forearm IK, which are in the layer called Body 2. In general, IK chains should have an initial angle of inclination or an initial bending so that the IK knows how the joint should rotate. But in some cases, this inclination is not given by the anatomy of the character. For instance, in the default BlenRig preset, which is based on Victor from Cosmos Laundromat, you can see that the leg has practically no inclination. So, if I didn't have this initial rotation number set up in the IK parameters, the leg would not be able to rotate properly. So if I put this number in 0, you can see that the IK stops working. That's what these numbers do. They let you override the initial rotation of the IK joints, allowing the IKs to work even if they don't have a correct inclination in the rest position. In the case of this character, the legs do have an initial bending, so if I put this parameter in 0, the IKs also work. The arms also have an inclination, so they also work well without overriding them. Okay, now let's go to automated movement. These first parameters correspond to the shoulder, which we had already set up in a previous chapter. You can set up how the shoulder moves automatically in IK when you move the arm back, down, forwards or up. So you change these numbers, you can see that the collarbone starts modifying its rotation. Then the torso FK control, torso invert control and neck FK control influence parameters define how these main controllers affect the individual joints of the torso and of the neck. If I rotate torso FK control, you can see how by modifying these parameters the spine rotates in a different way. I usually do not need to modify these parameters, as they greatly depend on the proportions of the characters, so it is not something that I usually change. The torso inv parameters are for when we set the torso in invert mode, and here I realize that I need to change some of these settings so that the curvature of the spine works better. The neck is already working well. And finally, we have the foot roll parameters, which will let you determine how the foot goes up from the heels to the tip. So, the foot roll amplitude parameter determines how many degrees the rotation of the ankle will have. Normally, you will set this up to 90 degrees. Then, the second parameter determines when the first joint of the toes starts to move up. By default, this happens at 50 degrees. And then, the third parameter determines when the tip of the toes starts to rotate up. And by default, this is set to 70 degrees. So, if you're not happy with the progression of these movements, you can change these parameters. Here I'll change the second parameter to 60. But no, I think that I'll leave it in 50 as it was, and I'll change the third parameter to 80 degrees so that the tip starts rotating a bit later. But anyway, in most cases when you're animating, you won't use this rotation to the top, so you will most likely want to rotate the joints of the toes manually with these controllers. Here we've got that the ankle rotation will be of 90 degrees, and then the first joint of the toes will start moving when the foot roll controller is at 50 degrees, and the tip of the toes will start rotating when the foot roll controller is at 80 degrees. So I will now copy these parameters to the right foot. On the other hand, if you want to cancel these automatic movements of the joints of the toes, you can do it by setting the T01 roll and T02 roll start parameters to 180 degrees. That way, those joints will never go up when you rotate the foot roll controller. So, Here I'm setting the Ch10 roll start to 180 degrees, and you see that the tip never moves up. And here I'm setting the Ch01 roll start to 180 degrees, and the first joint of the toes is not moving up either. Well, that's it for the automated movements, and here we have the realistic joints parameters, which we had already seen. And finally we had the toggles parameters. These checkboxes simply enable or disable the fingers and toes of the character. So if the character has toes, you can enable the toes from here. In this case, the toes are disabled for this character. Well, that's it. Be prepared, cause in the next chapter we will learn how to set up the parameters and actions of the facial rig. Stay tuned!